Salem, Massachusetts, September 19, 1692. A date etched in blood and frost on that chilling autumn day. A frostbitten field just outside the Puritan town became the stage for a spectacle of unimaginable cruelty. Giles Corey, an 80-year-old farmer, lay stripped bare on the icy ground, his frail body shivering under the gray, unforgiving sky. A heavy wooden plank pressed against his chest, and with each agonizing second, the townsfolk added another stone, the weight crushing his bones with a sickening crack that pierced the frigid air. Blood seeped from his mouth, staining the frost beneath him red, as his ribcage splintered under the unbearable pressure. His breaths were ragged, desperate gasps, each one a tortured struggle against the suffocating weight. The crowd stood in stunned silence, their faces pale with horror, as Corey's eyes rolled back in torment, his voice barely a whisper when he uttered his final, defiant words, "More weight." With those words, his body gave way, bones shattered. Organs ruptured, his life snuffed out in a death so brutal it would haunt Salem for centuries. This wasn't just an execution. It was a chilling display of cruelty, a grim chapter in the Salem Witch Trials, one of the darkest moments in American history. In 1692, the small town of Salem became a crucible of fear and fanaticism, where whispers of witchcraft turned neighbors into enemies, and over 200 souls were accused of consorting with the devil. 20 were executed, but none met a fate as horrifying as Giles Corey, crushed to death under the stones in a punishment meant to break his silence. The trials have since become a haunting part of America's past, immortalized in Arthur Miller's The Crucible, a play that mirrors the paranoia of the McCarthy era, a time when fear of communism gripped the nation, just as fear of witches once gripped Salem. Even today, the story of Salem lingers in the American psyche, retold every Halloween, with places like Gallows Hill drawing visitors eager to feel the chill of its ghostly legacy. So, what drove a community to such madness that they'd crush an old man to death? Was this the justice of a God-fearing people, or the barbarity of a town consumed by its own terror? Let's step into this blood-soaked tale of betrayal, fanaticism, and a death so gruesome it'll send shivers down your spine, from the icy streets of Salem to the fiery accusations that tore it apart. This story uncovers a tragedy that still echoes through time, a reminder of what happens when fear takes hold. If you're ready to face the horrors of history, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Do you think Corey was a hero or just a victim of his time? We can't wait to hear what you think. Salem, Massachusetts, in the winter of 1692, was a town gripped by an unshakable dread. Beneath a sky heavy with the threat of snow, the small Puritan settlement stretched across frostbitten fields and dense, looming forests, its wooden houses clustered together as if seeking shelter from an invisible menace. Smoke curled from chimneys, carrying the faint scent of burning pine. But even the warmth of a fire couldn't melt the icy fear that had settled into every corner of the town. The wind howled through the skeletal branches of bare trees, a mournful wail that seemed to carry whispers of dark forces lurking just beyond the forest's edge. In the heart of the village, the church bell tolled with a relentless rhythm, summoning the devout to prayer. But its hollow clang sounded more like a warning than a call to peace. Every creak of a shutter, every sudden illness, every failed crop was seen as a sign that the devil was among them, waiting to claim their souls. The people of Salem lived under a constant shadow of suspicion. their eyes darting to neighbors they once shared bread with, searching for any hint of witchcraft. Children huddled by the hearth, whispering tales of shadowy figures lurking in the woods, while parents clutched their Bibles tighter, murmuring prayers for protection against the unseen. The air buzzed with tension, a palpable dread that seeped into every whispered conversation. Market stalls stood eerily quiet, as townsfolk avoided gathering in groups, fearing that any assembly might draw the accusing gaze of a neighbor. Rumors spread like wildfire stories of livestock dying overnight, of strange markings scratched into barn doors, of dreams plagued by dark omens. In this isolated outpost, where the nearest town was a perilous day's journey through untamed wilderness, the Puritans felt trapped. Their faith, the only shield against a world they believed, was crawling with evil. But the true darkness wasn't hiding in the woods. It was brewing within their own hearts, a storm of fear and paranoia that would soon erupt into a nightmare of blood and betrayal. At the core of Salem's terror lay the unyielding faith of the Puritans, a community whose devotion to God was matched only by their terror of the devil. The Puritans saw Satan as an ever-present force, a malevolent entity that could possess the weak and corrupt the pure at any moment. Every misfortune a child's fever, a cow's sudden death, a storm that destroyed the harvest was blamed on witches, those believed to have forged unholy pacts with the devil himself. In the dim light of the meeting house, where flickering candles cast long, eerie shadows, the town's ministers stoked this fear with sermons that roared like wildfire. Clad in stark black robes, they warned of Satan's minions walking among the faithful, their voices thundering with descriptions of eternal damnation, lakes of fire, endless torment, the screams of the damned echoing forever. The congregation sat in trembling silence, their hearts pounding, as the preachers urged them to root out the evil before it consumed them all. The spark that ignited Salem's madness came when two young girls, Abigail Williams and Betty Paris, began to exhibit strange behavior, convulsing violently, screaming in terror, and speaking in tongues that chilled the blood of those who heard them. The town's doctor, his hands trembling as he examined the girls, declared them bewitched, and panic swept through Salem like a plague. Under pressure from the town's elders, the girls pointed trembling fingers at those they claimed had cursed them. Tituba, a Caribbean slave, Sarah Good, a beggar who muttered under her breath, and Sarah Osborne, a frail widow shunned by the community. The accusations spread with terrifying speed, fueled by fear, jealousy, and old grudges that had simmered beneath the surface for years. Neighbors turned on neighbors, and the town's jail swelled with the accused men, women, even children as young as 4, their tiny wrists bound with coarse rope. The trials that followed were a descent into madness, where spectral evidence, visions of spirits and ghostly torments, was accepted as undeniable truth. By the end of the ordeal, over 200 souls were accused, and 20 were executed, their bodies left swinging from the gallows as a grim warning to others. In this cauldron of hysteria, Giles Corey, an 80-year-old farmer, would face a fate more horrifying than any rope a death that would etch his name into the annals of American history as a symbol of both cruelty and defiance. Far from the hysteria that would soon engulf Salem, Giles Corey lived a life rooted in the rugged earth of Massachusetts. By 1692, at the age of 80, he stood as a weathered pillar of resilience. a farmer whose gnarled hands had tamed the unforgiving New England soil for decades. His modest homestead, shared with his wife Martha, was a testament to years of toil, a simple wooden house with a sloping roof, its hearth always glowing with the faint scent of pine smoke. The fields around it stretched wide, dotted with grazing livestock and golden stalks of corn, a quiet symbol of Corey's hard-earned prosperity. Despite his age, his broad shoulders still carried the strength of a younger man, though his steps were slower, his face etched with lines that told stories of a life hard-lived, yet. In the tight-knit Puritan community of Salem, Corey was far from beloved, his reputation a tangled web of respect and resentment. The townsfolk saw Corey as a man of stubborn pride, a farmer who spoke his mind with a bluntness that often bordered on defiance. Years earlier, his name had been dragged through the mud when he was hauled into court for a brutal act. He'd beaten a farmhand to death in a fit of rage, an incident that left a permanent stain on his standing. Whispers trailed him through the muddy streets of Salem, branding him as hot-tempered, a man whose disputes over land boundaries with neighbors frequently turned into shouting matches that echoed across the fields. But Corey was no villain. He was a man of principle, unafraid to stand his ground, even if it meant making enemies inside his home. Life was simple. Martha mended clothes by the firelight, and the faint sound of pages turning in their well-worn Bible filled the quiet evenings. Yet, in a town where conformity was a sacred virtue, the Corey's refusal to bow to the rigid moral code of the Puritans sowed seeds of distrust, seeds that would soon grow into a harvest of betrayal, reaping a terror that would stain Salem's history with blood. As the witch trials swept through Salem in the spring of 1692, the accusations spiraled into a vortex of paranoia, ensnaring even the most unlikely targets. Martha Corey, Giles's wife, became one of the first to be ensnared by the growing hysteria. Her only crime was a quiet defiance. She often read books late into the night, an act deemed unnatural for a Puritan woman in a town paralyzed by fear of the devil. The whispers turned into outright accusations when a group of young girls, caught in a frenzy of hysteria, claimed to see her specter haunting their dreams, tormenting them with dark magic. Martha was dragged before the court, her desperate pleas of innocence drowned out by the girls' theatrical screams, their bodies writhing as if possessed. Giles, torn between disbelief and dread, initially questioned her himself, hoping to clear her name, but his words only fanned the flames of suspicion. In a cruel twist of fate, the same girls turned their accusing fingers on him, declaring that his spirit, too, had appeared to them, cursing their souls with unholy power. The courtroom in Salem transformed into a theater of terror, where spectral evidence, visions of spirits and ghostly torments, was accepted as undeniable truth. Giles Corey, an 80-year-old farmer with no history of witchcraft, was branded a servant of the devil, his past sins dragged into the light as supposed proof of his guilt. The judges, their faces stern beneath their black caps, demanded a plea. But Corey saw through the madness. He knew that entering a plea, guilty or not, would lead to the seizure of his land, leaving his children destitute in a town already on the brink of collapse. In a move that stunned the court, he stood silent, refusing to speak, his weathered face a mask of resolve. His silence wasn't surrender, it was a final act of defiance, a desperate bid to protect the family he held dear. That defiance came at a horrifying cost. The court, enraged by his refusal, sentenced Corey to the ancient English punishment known as peine forte et dure, a torture designed to force a plea by crushing the accused beneath a pile of stones. As the judges passed their verdict, the air in the courtroom grew thick with dread, the townsfolk whispering of curses and divine judgment. The stage was set for a spectacle of cruelty that would sear itself into the memory of Salem, a nightmare that would unfold on a frost-bitten field, where Giles Corey's silence would speak louder than any confession, echoing through history as a chilling rebuke to a community consumed by its own terror. The sun dipped low on September 19, 1692, casting a blood-orange glow over the frost-bitten fields of Salem, Massachusetts, as a crowd gathered in a chilling silence. Giles Corey, an 80-year-old farmer whose defiance had enraged the court, was led to a desolate clearing just outside the town, a place that reeked of damp earth and impending doom. The air was sharp with the bite of autumn, and the ground beneath their feet crunched with frost, each step a grim reminder of the cold justice about to unfold. The townsfolk stood in a ragged semicircle, their breath visible in the frigid air, their faces a mixture of fear and grim determination. Some clutched rosaries, muttering prayers under their breath, while others stared with hollow eyes, unable to look away from the scene unfolding before them. At the center of it all, Corey was stripped bare, his frail, wrinkled body trembling against the icy ground, his gray hair matted with sweat despite the chill. The executioners placed a heavy wooden plank across his chest, its rough edges digging into his skin, and the crowd held its breath as the first stone was lifted, a jagged, gray slab that seemed to carry the weight of Salem's collective fear. The first stone landed with a dull thud, pressing the plank deeper into Corey's chest, and a low groan escaped his lips, a sound that sent shivers through the onlookers. His bony hands twitched at his sides, fingers clawing at the frozen earth as if searching for something to hold on to. The executioners didn't hesitate. They added another stone, then another, each one heavier than the last, the pile growing like a monument to the town's paranoia. With each stone, the plank creaked under the strain, and Corey's groans turned to gasps, his chest heaving as the weight crushed the air from his lungs. The crowd flinched as they heard the first crack, a sickening snap, as his ribs began to give way. The sound echoing through the field like a gunshot. Blood trickled from the corners of his mouth, a crimson stain against his pale, weathered face, and his eyes rolled back in agony, the whites stark against the dimming light. Yet, even as the pain consumed him, Corey's voice broke through the silence, weak but unyielding, more weight. The words hung in the air like a curse, a defiant cry that sent a ripple of unease through the crowd, their whispers of divine justice faltering in the face of such raw, unshakable resolve. The executioners, their faces hard as stone, continued their grim task, piling on more rocks until the stack loomed like a grotesque altar to the Puritan's fear. Each new stone brought a fresh wave of torment. Corey's gasps became ragged, gurgling rasps, his chest collapsing inward as the plank bit deeper into his flesh. The crowd could hear the splintering of bone, the wet crunch of ribs shattering one by one, each sound a dagger to their hearts. Blood now flowed freely from his mouth, pooling in the frost beneath him, its metallic tang mixing with the scent of damp earth in the air. His body convulsed beneath the weight, his legs kicking weakly against the ground. But still, he refused to break. The execution stretched into a second day, then a third, the stones growing heavier, the torment more unbearable with each passing hour. By the third day, Corey's face was a mask of agony, his eyes sunken, his skin ashen, his breath nothing more than a faint, wheezing rattle. The crowd stood frozen, some turning away, unable to bear the sight of his broken body, while others whispered of curses, their prayers now tinged with doubt. Was this truly the will of God, or the madness of men? The final stone was placed with a deliberate slowness, its weight the killing blow that ended Corey's suffering. His body gave way, at last, bones shattered beyond repair, organs ruptured under the relentless pressure, his last breath escaping in a gurgling rasp that seemed to echo with the defiance of his final words. The plank creaked one last time as the life drained from his eyes, leaving behind a lifeless shell on the blood-soaked frost, a haunting testament to the cruelty of a town consumed by its own terror. The crowd dispersed in silence, their faces pale, their hearts heavy with a guilt they couldn't yet name. In the days that followed, whispers of Corey's death spread through Salem like a plague, his unyielding spirit a shadow that would linger over the town for generations. In modern-day America, his story remains a chilling reminder of the Salem Witch Trials' brutality, a tale retold in history books, dramatized in the Crucible, and whispered about during Halloween, when the air in Salem grows thick with the ghosts of its past. As the sun set over Salem in the days following Giles Corey's brutal death, a heavy silence settled over the town. The echoes of his final words, more weight, lingering like a ghostly whisper in the frostbitten air. His execution marked a grim turning point for the Salem Witch Trials. The sheer cruelty of his punishment, witnessed by a community already shaken by months of hysteria, began to sow seeds of doubt among the townsfolk. Whispers of guilt and fear spread through the muddy streets, and within weeks, the trials that had claimed 20 lives and accused over 200 others ground to a halt. The Puritans, once so certain of their divine mission, were left to grapple with the blood on their hands, their faith now tainted by the memory of a broken old man who refused to bend to their will. Corey's death became a haunting symbol of the madness that had consumed Salem, a madness that would leave a permanent scar on America's history. The legacy of Giles Corey endures as a chilling reminder of the dangers of fanaticism. Etched into the American psyche through literature and lore, Arthur Miller's The Crucible, a cornerstone of American theater, immortalized the trials, drawing parallels to the McCarthy-era witch hunts of the 1950s, where fear of communism mirrored the paranoia of 1692. In modern-day Salem, Corey's story is retold every Halloween, drawing visitors to Gallows Hill, where the ghosts of the past seem to linger in the October air. His defiance has become a symbol of resistance, a testament to the human spirit's refusal to break, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Yet, some whispers in Salem speak of a darker legacy. A local legend claims that Corey's spirit still haunts the field where he died, his voice murmuring, "More weight," whenever injustice stirs in the town. Is this a true curse, born of his suffering, or merely the echo of a community's guilt? The Salem Witch Trials teach a brutal lesson. When fear takes hold, justice becomes cruelty, and truth is the first casualty. What do you think? Does Corey's curse still linger in Salem? Or is it a tale born of remorse? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear them. If this story chilled you to the bone, explore more horrors on Torture Vault, like the molten gold death of Crassus,